work, and not everybody is able to dedicate the time or the effort. But I would say of the long-standing students, maybe 3 or 4 tops.
So what else happened in your training?
What happened in the training was that I didn't realize it until one day I started to open up all my chakras. And it was totally unconscious in terms of, I knew what chakras were and everything, but one day I was practicing and I saw this big white light around my arms and I freaked out and I called my teacher over and he goes, well, you just happen to be in luck because we have a monk visiting from China who spent 3 years in a cave. I felt like I was in a comic strip or something.
Wow.
It was by coincidence, which we know there really is no coincidence. In fact, he was in the office talking to the teacher, and he came over and he explained what was going on. So at that point, I realized the energy was shifting, and I was becoming pretty powerful. And the next question was, well, what do you do with that?
What do you do with that?
Well, I went on to compete in tournaments throughout the world and then did that whole experience and decided that it was very corrupt and just said, I've got enough trophies for my ego and kind of moved it into another level.
How do they rank people in Kung Fu? Is it degrees like in karate?
It's slightly different. They don't have belts per se, but the schools are all different because it's not standardized as the Japanese have. The Chinese are more informal in that, so it's mostly up to each specific teacher or master. But they do it more in terms of years and how many exams you've passed versus, giving you a colored belt.
Share with us what you shared with me on the phone about how you were blindfolded or how you were in a dark room. Do you remember?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we got left in dark rooms to practice. It was part of the training, and I didn't realize it until later. I thought at first that they hadn't paid their electric bill. So things must not be going too well here because a lot of these teachers in Chinatown these are not situations where these are people who make a lot of money, and they do it, mostly the really good ones do it out of a love for the art, and most of them struggle financially throughout life. And so anyhow, I thought that they hadn't paid the electricity, and that day I was practicing, they're called tiger hooks, which are metal hooks which are about 3 feet long, and they have a hook on each end, and in the middle a crescent moon, and you have one in each hand. And so they involve a lot of arm movement, and it's tiring unless you're in shape. However, even when you're in shape, after an hour, it gets very tiring. So the teacher said he'd be right back, and he wasn't right back, and it was getting later and later, and I thought I was locked in the building. I didn't know what time it was. The teacher finally came back and said, okay, you can go home now. And being in the darkness was a way to tune into oneself.
Are you telling me he put you in the dark on purpose?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, were you doing moves or were you just sitting there?
No, movement. No, it was about 2 hours of movement. So that's how they train you. That's the old method of training, is really through a lot of self-discovery in odd situations. You think you're abandoned, but you're really not. It's a way of forcing you to evaluate on a deeper level what exactly you're doing and what kind of movement you're doing, and inner movement, outer movement. It's an old technique, but it's not pretty.
How did male students receive you?
A lot of jealousy I had to navigate through, yeah. And even a couple of other females, too, there was some amount of jealousy. There was bonding, but there was some amount of jealousy as well. But it was just part and parcel of the training.
Were you ever scared?
Scared of what?
Getting hurt.
No. I've stabbed myself a couple of times, but no, not at all. Not at all.
You spent many years as an interior designer also practicing feng shui, but the way you articulated, it's the very ancient style feng shui. Kan Yu? Talk about that.
That's correct. Feng shui is wind water, translated literally, and it was coined a little later. Kan Yu was derived from the Bon, the B-O-N tradition, going back into Mongolia. So that's really, really ancient stuff. The Kan Yu masters were used by the imperial courts, and they could only work for the imperial courts to design the Forbidden City and other parts of the kingdoms to control and mitigate the population.
And so how did you learn that style of feng shui? And how did you find out about it? Why did it become part of your life?
I found out about it through groveling to another teacher who began as a Qigong teacher, and later he suggested that maybe I should start looking at feng shui, which he didn't want to teach me right away. So that was another test. He's the eldest of all my teachers, and he was the one who really taught me all that he knew with the Kanyu.
How is it different than the Western translated? We interviewed Angie Milan, one of the first people that became known for bringing feng shui to America and bridging the East and West cultures. And I'm wondering how you would articulate the difference between feng shui and Kanyu in practicality.
There's a lot of observing involved. Not all the rules and regulations some of the later schools had. There was kind of a branching off during time, and certain schools became specific in certain tactics, magnetics with the compass or a black hat. So it's kind of the grandmother before things started to become specific. It's kind of like doctors who have specialties, where before there was more of a general doctor, general practitioner.
That's a good analogy.
That was the explanation I was given by my grandmaster.
So now you're working with color and healing.
I am.
Talk about that.
That's correct. A lot of us right now are living in FEAR, those initials, false evidence appearing real, fear. I'm trying to provide people with tools, and I tell them, you've got a toolbox. I'm trying to give you some tools to navigate through your fear. And as they learn to navigate through their fear, they start to feel stronger, like Kung Fu master. That flame in them becomes larger and more powerful. And so I found that through the use of color, which I was really good at in the fine arts, color really affects us in everything from the color of food we eat to the color of clothes we wear. The vibrations of each color define movement. And so I teach people how to use color appropriately.
That's wonderful. I just did a piece with David Olszewski from the Light Energy Company. We did 3 shows, one in 2004 and another one a couple of weeks ago, and one other one on how to use light with healing and different frequencies of light and color.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's different focus, the light part. But the color part is fascinating.
It is, and something interesting I was thinking about this morning, thinking about our talk today, was that I found that there were certain moments of my life in particular that I could wear certain colors and I can't wear them now. And I was thinking, why is it? Especially in Chinatown, where they use a lot of red. We use red tassels on our weapons to optically divert our opponents, to distract them. And so I was wearing a lot of red, and now I find that I'm pushed on more into the blues. And I was wondering, well, so when I'm talking to people, I've got to tell them why I can't wear red. But we're vibrating differently in different parts of our life, was my conclusion.
How much of Kung Fu is instinctual?
I would say maybe 60%.
And how much is mental? The other 40?
Well, they try to get you out of a mental state. It's like dancing, really. I would say mental is much less, is maybe 5%, but they try to keep you out of your mental state because then you are not instinctual.
Talk about your work with color a little bit. Give us an example of what you would do, and why did the use of color become relevant to you?
The use of color becomes relevant to me because we all react to color. And so what I find is that a lot of times people will be wearing colors which are not appropriate to their situation. And then they ask themselves, well, why didn't I perform well? Or why didn't people react to me the way I was expecting they would react? And all these things. I find color is not always instinctual in many people. And also how we perceive ourselves is very different than how others perceive us. So, for example, I assist people, men and women, to use, according to their situation or their meeting or who they're meeting with, certain colors. For example, if you notice in the service industry, there's a lot of blue and white. I would say people who are in finance use a lot of blue and white. People who work in airlines, service-oriented, a lot of blue and white in the airline uniforms. The